Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Hello, everybody. It's Jeff, and I want to welcome you to episode 50 of Dental Business RX. It's our first notable milestone that went really fast. And I want to start this show by thanking all of you, our listeners. I want to give you a big thanks and acknowledgement for your support and your feedback. They've been vital in making the show successful. And truthfully, without you, there is no show. I look forward to recording every week. And really, again, that's because of you. So again, a big, big thanks. All right. So let's get down to business. This episode is part 2 of a 2-part series on designing the ideal schedule for your dental practice. The concept of these 2 episodes was we were going to really dig into the subject rather than going over a couple of scheduling tips and look at the basic components of constructing a schedule that works for you. In last week's episode, we talked about what your scheduling system would have to be able to do. We discussed how to set monthly and daily goals. We discussed the different classes of procedures, which with relation to your schedule, moving to a 10-minute appointment book versus a 15-minute appointment book, as well as we left you with a little bit of an assignment to determine procedure durations, because you have to figure out procedure durations for the most common procedures that you perform. Now, I'd suggest if you missed last week's episodes that you take a minute, well, it's a little bit longer than a minute, and listen to it to catch up to where you are now. Or if you're like me, you might skip it and just go through right into this one, which is fine. Totally up to you. That episode is still there and it'll always be there. And in this week's episode, we're going to wrap up the subject by covering how your dental assistant fits into all this, double booking, how to structure your schedule, including how to fit emergency appointments in, and then how to put all these tools together. Now, full disclosure, this is probably going to be longer than a 30-minute episode. I haven't recorded it yet. I'm at the beginning of the episode, but just based on what I have to cover, I'm going to estimate it's going to probably be longer than 30 minutes. I have no idea where it's going to clock in, but just warning you ahead of time as we go because we advertise 30 minutes or less. Okay, so let's just jump into this. So I want to start by looking at schedule efficiency, double booking, and how your dental assistant fits into all this. So what your dental assistant can and cannot do is legally governed by the Dental Practice Act for your state. If you don't know, I would definitely tell you to take a look at that because that gives you an idea of what they are and are not allowed to do. Now, that being said, you may have a dental assistant who is allowed to do certain things, but they just don't know how yet, in which case you would want to train the assistant to be able to do them. The reason behind this is to maximize efficiency in your practice, you don't want to have to do things that a dental assistant could do. That's why you have a dental assistant, and it's just not going to work out as well if they were fully functioning. With relation to double booking, what is it? Let's first talk about what it's not, because some people think that double booking is working out of 2 chairs with one dental assistant. Not one in each chair. That would be true double booking, but literally it's you and an assistant, and you work in room 1, go over to room 2, your assistant leaves the room for a minute, sees some room 2, and then you move over to room 2, and then somebody cleans up room 1. That's not double booking. Double booking is an assistant for each room, which we'll talk about as we go. So again, to properly double book, you want to make sure that you know what an assistant is allowed to do. Depending on your state, it might be, making notes, making temps, taking x-rays, topical anesthetic, removing sutures, etc. It really depends on where you practice. And make sure you consult it before you do it. So now, how does this apply to double booking the schedule? Because if you properly double book, it can be immensely productive and efficient. So again, what is true double booking? It is, let's say we're working out of 2 chairs. It is an assistant in each room working with the doctor. The doctor is moving back and forth. To make double booking work, 4 conditions must be in place. The first condition, each doctor treatment room has to have an assigned dental assistant. Now, I've seen some people where the assistants will bounce back and forth, and that's not horrible. I'm more of a fan, if you have room 1 and 2, and those are the rooms you're working out of as a doctor, there's an assistant for room 1 and an assistant for room 2. Will they work in other rooms at times? Yes, but that is that assistant's room. That room is kept stocked by that assistant. That room is kept clean by that assistant. That is that assistant's operatory. All right. So minimally, you have to have an assistant for each treatment room. I like taking it a step further where each assistant is responsible for a specific treatment room. The second condition is the appointment book would have to have adequate primary procedure time blocked each day so that the production goal can be met. We talked about what a primary procedure, a high dollar procedure, which again doesn't mean it just has to be a big procedure. It could be, 10 composites might be a primary procedure because of the dollar value associated with it. But you have to have an adequate primary time book. I got into last week how most people like to have that in the morning. Some people think it's, again, I'm not going to rehash the whole last episode, but I like having it in the morning because then your production goal is met by lunch and you're fine, right? But you have to have this booked every day. The third condition of double booking is the doctor cannot be scheduled to be in more than one place at a time. You can't do that. Remember, we had one client, it was awesome, who was telling me about that had a new scheduler, and the scheduler was very cool, very, what's the word? I hate to use the word aggressive, but she was aggressive in a good way, meaning she was a go-getter, right? She really wanted to fill the book and make it productive. So he looks at the schedule one day, and she's brand new, and he has 3 root canals, and these are all, 3 root canals booked at the same time in 3 different chairs, and they're all for him. So he didn't get upset. He just explained to the scheduler how this was a physical impossibility because he can't be in more than one place at once. Now, that's an extreme example of having the doctor in more than one place at a time. But the basic tenet of double booking is the doctor is only in one room at a time because they can't be in both. So the fourth basic concept of double booking is assuming you've estimated procedure times, which we talked about last week. You've determined that a single crown takes you from start to finish, from the minute the patient is seated to the minute they are discharged, takes an hour or 70 minutes. Assuming you've worked out procedure times for the procedures you're performing the most, these procedures have to be broken down into doctor versus assistant time. So what is doctor versus assistant time? We're going to talk about how you'd represent it on the schedule. And this was the area I was concerned about as far as doing this as a podcast because it's very visual. I do have some downloadables so you can follow along with me on this. Obviously, if you're driving, please don't, but you can do it later. But this was the area I was concerned about, but I think I figured it out. Again, you can let me know with the feedback. But what is doctor versus assistant time? The doctor time is when the doctor is in whatever room they are in, most likely with a dental assistant, all right? 99.9% of the time. Maybe if they're off in the hygiene op doing a new patient exam, they're not with a dental assistant. But in any other given time, if we have a representation on the schedule as doctor time, that means doctor and dental assistant. What is assistant time? That is assistant with no doctor. And we're going to show you how these are represented here in a second. But the schedule has to have that accurately represented, and you want your procedures to show that. So how is this done? So during any procedure, there are steps that require the doctor, along with steps that do not, right? And again, this is all dependent on the procedure, what an assistant legally can do, as well as your assistant's skill set. So if you take this all into account, we would want to represent on the schedule when the doctor is in a room with an assistant and when the assistant is in the room without a doctor. How is this normally represented? There's this slash and the X system. There's a backslash, right? A slash, sort of like you see when you're typing in a web address. And then there's an X, like the letter X. Most softwares do this. People used to use it on appointment books as well. Some people use a dot and a slash. Dot is doctor time, or a circle is doctor time, and the slash is assistant time. I'm going to do slash and X because that seems to be the most common one, and you can always set your software up to use this. So as an example, let's say you've sat down and you figured out that a single crown prep takes 70 minutes, 70 minutes in your practice. Now, if we're on a 10-minute book, that would be 7 units of 10 minutes, right? 7 units. A unit is a 10-minute block. So 70 minutes. And this is why you want a 10-minute versus a 15-minute book, because it takes you longer than 60 minutes, but it takes you less than 75. That's 5 minutes that you just lost, right? Anyway, so you've determined that a single unit crown prep takes you 70 minutes. So how would that be represented with relation to assistant time? Well, the first 10 minutes would be the assistant seating the patient, etc., right? The next 40 minutes, the doctor has to be in that room flat out prepping the crown, and maybe the last 20 minutes, the assistant is doing making the temp, and the doctor pops in to make sure everything's cool and make sure the temp is in correctly, and then the patient is discharged. Again, what the assistant can and can't do depends on your state and their skill set. And also the whole slash and X system, how long a procedure takes, really depends on you as the doctor. And I'm not taking a position on this. Some doctors take longer than others on certain procedures. That's just life. That's how it works. Some work really fast, some don't. And that's okay because this is your schedule. You have to make sure that it works for you. And remember, and I mentioned this last week, when you're when you're determining procedure time and you're actually going to represent it as policy for your scheduler, you're going to build in a little bit of extra time. So if a procedure really takes you 60 minutes, you might represent it at 70. I'll explain why as we go. Anyway, so how would this look? We've got 10 minutes of assistant time at the beginning, followed by 40 minutes of doctor time, followed by 20 minutes of assistant time. All right? So what that would look like would be a slash for that first 10 minutes of assistant time, 4 X's for the 40 minutes of doctor time, followed by 2 slashes for assistant time. And you know what you can do to play with this a bit? If you did get a chance to sit down and work out how long certain procedures take you, prep procedures, you can even do this for delivery procedures. How long does it take you to deliver a crown or an onlay or whatever it is that you want to do? And take a look at that and start, figure out how long it takes, and then break it into doctor assistant time based upon what your assistant can do, right? So now this is the basic thing. We've now figured out procedure time. We have it represented as X's and slashes. Here is where the rubber hits the road. All right, this is where we get into double booking. So if we use this system, it allows for the doctor to operate effectively out of more than one chair. It allows the doctor to start with the next patient while the assistant in the other room is wrapping up with the patient the doctor just completed. So this is where I'm going to get into some slides. I'm going to put one up and describe to you, if you don't have the slides in front of you, as to what you're looking at. But here we go. So let's say we have a crown prep for a patient, Bill Board, and it's kind of funny. Anyway, so I have an appointment book schedule here. I have 2 rooms represented, room 1 and room 2, and it's broken into 10-minute units, and the schedule starts at 8 a.m. So Bill Board is in room 1, starting at 8 a.m. So at the 8 o'clock slot, little box here, we have a slash, then we have 4 X's, and then we have a slash. So Bill Board is discharged at 9:10 because it's a 70-minute appointment. That's how that would look on the schedule. So now, let's say the next patient we're going to bring in is Sally Smith for a root canal. Well, Sally Smith, remember, Bill Board is being discharged at 9:10. The assistant is with Bill for the last 20 minutes. Well, the assistant in room 2, again, remember we have an assistant for each room, seats Sally Smith at 9:40. This is 30 minutes before Bill's going to leave. So that first 10 minutes, Sally is seating this patient, and then let's say the doctor wants, the root canal is represented on the doctor's schedule, in this case as a slash for the first 10 minutes of the appointment, and then 4 X's. They're all doctor time from there. There's never a point where the doctor is going to leave the room without an assistant or just leave the assistant alone. So it's a slash and 4 X's, a 50-minute appointment. So Sally's being seated at 9:40. And the doctor's already 20 minutes or 30 minutes really into Sally's appointment and 20 minutes into the time that he or she is in the room with Sally by the time Bill is being discharged. Do you see? So we've actually cut some time out of the schedule. If we weren't to double book properly and only had one dental assistant, then how would that look? If we were just to go back to back, we would have Bill there from 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock to 9:10. We would seat Sally at 9:10. We wouldn't be discharging Sally till 10 o'clock. Whereas in this case, Sally is being discharged by 9:30. We saved a half hour. You're getting the general idea of this, all right? So it's not going back. It saves an enormous amount of time, hours every day if you're able to do this. Now, one comment on double booking is, because I've had somebody ask me, I just opened my practice. I have 65 or 75 patients. I'm still doing my own hygiene. Should I be double booking? No, you don't have the volume for it yet. But let's say you have 1 to 2 hygienists and they're really moving fast. And yeah, I would be double booking because why not? You're going to be more efficient. You're going to be able to see more patients. You'll also be able to work more efficiently in less hours. It's definitely a thing. And then I have a little slide here. These are all downloadable, by the way, the descriptions that I'm giving you. I should have mentioned that earlier. But I have a downloadable for where it talks about double booking slides 1 through 4. And I've got the link on the episode webpage. And I just went through the first 3 slides with you where we showed booking by itself, then adding a second appointment, then if we did it back to back versus double booking it properly. And then I have a little slide here which shows you how the rest of the morning might look. I have Bill Board at 8 o'clock. Bill's being discharged at 9:10. Sally's being seated at 9:40 for her root canal. She's being discharged at 9:30. And at 9:10, Jim Johnson is being put in the room right after Bill Board, room 1, to start veneer preps on 7 through 10. So we're well into a super productive day before 10 o'clock in the morning. So this is what it might look like as you're doing it. Now let's talk about a few unique aspects of this and also a couple of other pointers on putting this together. So obviously we have to know basic procedures, how long they take, what's doctor and assistant time. We have to have our software set up to be able to use an X and a slash system, as well as not to allow two X's at the same time on the schedule, because that means the doctor is in two places at once. And those are some of the basics. Let's talk about emergencies for a second. What do you do with an emergency patient? Well, first off, what is an emergency? And this is the question I ask in our seminar all the time. So let's say I call up and I say, I'd like to come in. My tooth is a little bit painful. It's in my back of my mouth on the upper part of my right side of my face. You say, okay, cool. Are you in pain? Yes, I'm in pain. And you go, okay, well, Jeff, we can squeeze you in at 11. And I say, 11 really doesn't work for me. Could we do 3:30? That's better for me. I can I get off work at 3. Is that an emergency? Absolutely not. If I call you and you say you can squeeze me in at 11 and I'm an emergency, I'm going to be super thankful and make sure I'm there at probably 5 or 10 to 11 so that I don't miss my appointment. You're going to work me in. All right. Now, emergencies get a little bit funny in the sense that, one, a true emergency, you don't want to blow off. You want to get them in, especially if it's patient of record, but it also offers you immense new patient opportunities. Maybe somebody can't get in somewhere. They've called around and you can get them in that day. You want to see them that day. Then you definitely want to get them in. This could be a new patient. You do the emergency treatment, then you put them on your normal initial new patient line in your practice, and then they become a normal patient of record. It's a good deal. So what you want to be able to do is get them in, but you can't, especially if you're properly booked and you're, back to back, but efficiently booked, you can't slam a 1-hour root canal appointment in there, in the middle of everything that's going on without wrecking your schedule for the day. So that doesn't work. So what can you do? Here are a few ideas. Again, I'm not a dentist, so you have to decide what you feel comfortable with doing and what you don't feel comfortable with doing. But what I've seen some people do that seems to work out pretty well is, so you book the patient, they come in, you're going to probably spend, let's say you're booked hard. You just don't have a ton of extra time. You're just booked hard throughout the day. You're going to have the patient come in. Let's say they have a toothache. All right. Well, if they have a toothache, most likely you're going to give them an antibiotic before you start working on that tooth. You have them come in, you take a PA, you look at the tooth, and, it's either an extraction or, you need to reduce the infection and do a root canal or whatever it is you're going to do. You give them their antibiotic and you put them back on the schedule to come back the next day or the day after that to do the root canal. Right? You saw them, they're happy. You did some palliative treatment. Well, actually not truly, you didn't do the palliative treatment. You're getting them out of pain and you're going to bring them back to do the treatment. This way you can at least accommodate the patient. All right. Now it's funny because inevitably I get asked a question. What if a patient calls and says they have a broken tooth? Well, no matter what you do, that's going to take longer than 5 minutes. This is where you're going to have to figure out a way to work them in if you have time in the schedule. Usually, I've had an emergency once. It was 1999. I was in Orlando. We were actually doing a seminar. I was in Orlando and not near my dentist at all, and my tooth hurt. So I had to find a doctor to see me, and I knew this doctor was busy that day, so they worked me in. I waited for a while, but I eventually got seen, and I was willing to deal with it. You see, because I knew I was an emergency patient and I know how it works. So you have to be willing to accommodate them. You have to get them in quickly. And in a lot of cases, it's somebody that you can see in a few minutes and then bring them back the day after or next day to treat. In other cases, most emergency patients are willing to stick around so that you can work them into the schedule. Now, last few pointers on this as far as when you're constructing your schedule. And again, this is a huge subject. I mentioned this last week. We do a 2-day seminar on it here at MGE, the Scheduling for Production seminar. I'll put the link on the episode webpage. And we also have about 7 hours of scheduler training on DDS Success. We have a Art of Scheduling Productively course for the whole team because everybody should have an idea of how the schedule works, as well as a schedule coordinator course, which trains the schedule coordinator on everything there is to know about scheduling. So that being said, what are our last few pointers on these? However you set up your appointment times, because you're sitting and figuring out actual time, right? When you figure out procedure duration. You're going to have to turn this into a policy eventually, and it doesn't have to be some big fancy policy. It might just be a list of CDT codes and the length of time it takes, right? But you're going to have to turn this into a policy to hand to your scheduler so they know how to operate, because they're going to start putting this in your book. Well, before you turn it into a policy, you're going to slightly exaggerate the length of time each procedure takes. This is how you build in some time to your schedule. Because if you don't do this and you're scheduling, if it really takes you 70 minutes start to finish with a patient and you only schedule 70 minutes, if the slightest thing goes wrong, you're in trouble. You're also not going to have time for recall appointments, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But you want to have it slightly exaggerated. It's better to have an extra 5-10 minutes than to run behind. It also allows you to fit quick things in you'd not be able to do otherwise. You could do an Invisalign start or something like this that you'll magically seem to create time out of nowhere. So make it slightly exaggerated before you turn it into a policy. Figure out the actual time, then exaggerate it for the policy slightly. And you have to account for, this is the second point, hygiene and recall exams, new patient exams, et cetera, in the schedule. Now, how would I do this? I probably would not put an X on the schedule for a recall exam. And I'll tell you why. If you are exaggerating your procedure length, a 60-minute appointment, really, you have 70 minutes allocated for, you're going to have time to bop into the hygiene room because you got that extra few minutes to do that recall exam. There will be time. It's baked in. All right. With a new patient exam, that's a different story because that's a 20-minute deal, especially even if they're in hygiene, you would have those X's so that you are not able to be put in any other room during that 20-minute period. And obviously, if it's in your room, those X's would be there. If you're doing the new patient initial, well, you're going to do it. But I mean, if it's not seeing hygiene first as opposed to seeing the doctor, then you want that X, you want those X's represented. So I would represent a new patient exam. I wouldn't necessarily represent hygiene exams or recall exams because those should be very quick. Now, that being said, if you have 3 hygienists and you're a solo practitioner, you probably don't have enough time baked in and you probably need an associate. But anyway, that's what I would do because truthfully, you can, if I'm seeing the hygienist for a recall, I'm going to walk in, they're going to do my bite wings and then maybe start the perio probing or whatever. If you walk in at that point or you walk in 10 minutes later while they're doing the prophy, it's not the end of the world. You can still do your exam. It's not like you have to be there at a certain time. Whereas with a new patient, it's, once the data is gathered, you have to be in that room. All right. So one thing I'd recommend if you want to mess with this a little bit, again, I know this is hard to communicate on a podcast. I apologize for that. But I've got also on the downloads page as a downloadable link. They're all going to be on the same page. We have this new course, the Art of Scheduling Productively, a new version dropping on our online platform, DDS Success, in the next couple weeks. I've got what we call our scheduling drill. Drill is an exercise that you do, and this is something you can do for yourself or give your scheduler to do. And it's 2 pieces of paper. One is a 2-room book, an empty 2-room book at 10-minute intervals where you can write in. And then the drill itself describes a series of patients, primary, secondary, and tertiary procedures. It gives the X's and slashes as far as how long the procedure is and what the procedure is. And then have you or your scheduler figure out how to fit all of those appointments in to the book in an efficient manner. It's one thing, if you want to mess with this a little bit, I would definitely give it a shot. All right, you can try it. It's on the downloads or it's a download on the episode webpage. All right, last few points here. One thing you also have to build into your schedule. I talked about this last week when we talked about the basic things that any scheduling system has to have is you have to have time to sell. Now, I've spoken about this before in a few other episodes, but I like summarizing it here because it fits into the scheduling concept. I'm also going to represent it visually. But ultimately, you can't produce what you don't sell. In dentistry, we allocate time normally for diagnosis, and for clinical treatment, we don't allocate time for sales. And as I've said before, there is a skill side to sales and an organizational side to sales. And what do I mean by that is if I have somebody who is the best salesperson in the world, and it takes a half hour to close a certain kind of deal, and I give that salesperson only 5 minutes, and I keep doing that, they're not going to close anyone. Even though their sales skill is maximized, they don't have adequate time to actually close it. Now, if let's say I give them 10 people and I only give them 5 minutes, they're not going to close anybody. Then I take somebody who's a mediocre salesperson and I give them those same 10 people, but I give them a half hour with each prospect. Let's say they're mediocre. They only close 40%. Well, they have 4 closes versus the great salesperson who has none. So time plays into this too. So there's an organizational side of sales. And how does it normally work in dentistry, especially even with patients of record or new patients? You go into a room, you do a recall exam, patient has some treatment to do. Let's say it's a decent sized procedure, $4,000 or $5,000 worth of work. You spend 5 minutes explaining it. You don't really have time to answer their questions, explain why they need it, etc. Then they go to the front, they tell your treatment coordinator or whomever that they want to think about it, and they go on the incomplete treatment list, not to be seen again for at least 6 months, if ever again. Same thing with a new patient. You spend 15 minutes doing an exam and building rapport, and you have 5 minutes left in the appointment. You don't have time to adequately present this treatment. And I think we kind of lose the thread on this at times. When we talk about consults, we're normally thinking about, second opinions, or, you're doing this huge consult because you're doing an all-on-6 case or an FMR, and you're going to spend an hour with this patient. That's what we think of when we think of consults. But I think we lose the thread on this because we're not looking at if you're telling a patient they need $4,000, $5,000, $7,000 worth of treatment, that is not a humongous treatment plan. But what if this person makes $80,000 a year? You tell them they need $7,000 worth of treatment. This is like 1 month's salary. That takes time to decide. And I've said this before, but I challenge you in the sense, well, you can do it as a thought experiment. If I asked you to spend 1 month of your salary and I only did it in 5 minutes and didn't really take time to explain it, you'd probably tell me no. So I think those medium-sized to even smaller treatment plans might be $2,000 or $3,000, right? You have to use your judgment on this. You also have to take the patient into consideration too, right? A patient of record might take a shorter amount of time to explain it to. You have more of a relationship with them. But, even a $2,000 or $3,000 case may take, 20 minutes to explain. But if you don't explain it and get the patient to accept it, they're not going to do it. So you have to build time into the schedule to sell, right? So, I spoke about in our reception episode the idea of having an hour and a half new patient appointment for certain types of patients. You missed it, you can go check it out. But the average new patient initial appointment is about an hour. So in a lot of cases, you may find yourself where you don't have time to present that treatment now. Maybe you do. Maybe you have time on the schedule. Maybe they also have time. But if you don't have time, you're going to have to bring this patient back for a consultation. Obviously, if you can present it today, absolutely present it today. But let's say you just can't. You don't have time, they don't have time, etc. You have to bring them back for a consult. So when do you want to put consults on this schedule? Well, I'm a fan of putting consult time first thing in the morning and first thing after lunch. First thing in the morning and first thing after lunch. Why? Well, a few things. Number one, if I schedule it on the schedule like that, 20 minutes or whatever it is, I'm focused. I don't have my attention on a bunch of other patients that I'm in the middle of, etc., especially if it's first thing in the morning. And also, we have a basic rule here at MGE, which is we teach our clients, if you don't have time to finish the sale, don't start it. So again, I'm putting it on with enough time so that I can go from start to finish and answer all the patient's questions. So let's look at how first thing in the morning, what's really nice about this, even though, and I should mention this, we went over different classes of procedures. Technically, a consult would count as a tertiary procedure and no charge. And so why would I be sticking that in the morning? Well, consult's a bit of a specialized appointment. All right, just keep that in mind. I may not have my crown deliveries in the morning, but I would have some consults in the morning. So let's look at an example of this. I have a series of slides you can download on the episode webpage. They're called Time to Sell, slides 1 through 4. So if I start with slide 1, let me describe to you what you'd be looking at. You're looking at room 1 and room 2, starting at 8 in the morning, and I have to 10 o'clock represented on this slide. And at 8 in the morning, we have a fellow named Bill Board in there for a consultation. It's a /XX/, the assistant sees him, doctor goes in for 20 minutes, and then the assistant dismisses him. And then at 8:20, we're seating Molly Miller for a consult for 40 minutes again, /XX/. And at 8:40, we're seating Mary Jimson for veneers on 7 through 10, right? So we have Mary Jimson, veneers 7 through 10 at 8:40, Molly Miller at 8:20, and Bill Board at 8 o'clock. We're double booking this. We have an assistant in each room. Well, what happens? We get a call from Mary Jimson that she has to cancel at the last minute. She just had a family emergency, had to jump on an airplane. She's already out of town. You just find that out that morning. Your scheduler is beside himself or herself because this appointment is coming up in 40 minutes. So they're scrambling at this point. What are they going to do to fill this appointment time? Well, I wouldn't have them stop doing whatever they might do, pulling a procedure from tomorrow, etc. But because we have these two consults in the morning, Bill Board and Molly Miller, there's always a chance that Bill or Molly could take Mary Jimson's appointment spot on the schedule. Let's say Bill has some crowns to do. So you talk to Bill that morning. Bill wants to proceed with treatment. And you tell Bill, I just found out my next patient couldn't make it today. Had something come up. I could actually start this procedure today, Bill. And Bill says, that's funny, Doc. I was hoping to get in soon. I didn't realize it was that soon. I'm actually off work today. So they work out the financial arrangements. And then instead of having nothing to do at 8:40, you're seeing Bill for crown preps on 3, 4, 5, and 13. Now, I have this all represented on these 4 slides. You can kind of see the progression of it. But you're getting the idea. You can use consults in the morning. You do 2 20-minute consults, and it can actually make up for production you might lose, considering that is your most productive time. So that's why I like first thing in the morning. I like first things after lunch because, again, the doctor is distraction-free. They're not in the middle of another procedure. And you shouldn't, but let's say you had to work a little bit through lunch. You can usually eat something real quick and see the patient without being distracted, because the most important thing for consultation is that you are completely focused. So there's your basics. That's how it works with a dental assistant. That's how you set your schedule up. You can do that scheduling drill as an exercise to see how this might work. I'm also going to give you a few implementation steps here. That being said, there is a ton to the subject of scheduling. There's scheduling policy, troubleshooting the schedule, getting your scheduler functioning, filling last-minute openings, etc., because we haven't even talked about hygiene as well. And we were at least able to cover some of the basic structure and concepts here. I hope you found them useful. You're able to start doing some of this stuff in your practice. So what are some basic implementation steps that I would give you? Well, if you take what we went over in last week's episode and this week's episode, I would start creating. If you're not setting monthly goals, you absolutely should. That's Business Owner 101. Start setting your monthly goals and breaking them down to daily. I went over this in last week's episode. You break it down to how many days you're working that month, subtract hygiene so you know how much production the doctor is supposed to do every day. I would definitely, to coordinate case presentations and production in the office, I would do morning production meetings. I talk a little bit about these in an earlier episode on having your morning huddle become more productive. We also have a video on this on DDS Success, or online platform. I would take the procedures you do most commonly, there might be quite a few, and figure out the average length of each of these procedures. You could just start timing them. Have the scheduler take notes. Assistant brought patient Jane back at 10 o'clock. Patient Jane was getting a crown done and was discharged at 11:01. All right, that's an hour. All right. I definitely recommend that you switch to a 10-minute book. Now, I've been asked about this before. Very few people are on a 15-minute book anymore. And I'm not, look, you have to do what works for you. So what I would not advise is, if you're on a 15-minute book, don't just switch it and blow up your schedule. I would probably pick a time where the schedule is starting to thin out a bit, where you're going to start moving off of scheduling on the 5s, right? So you might switch, but then you're going to keep the schedule as is till you hit a point where the schedule's thinned out and you can actually move people around a little bit to make it work without too much work on your end. But a 10-minute book makes a huge difference. So you should then also figure out, it's very important to know what your assistant can and cannot do in your state. You also have to know your assistant's skill sets. And then I would take those procedure durations that I made, and I would figure out the X's and slashes in those procedures. What's assistant-only time? What is doctor and assistant time? Then, assuming you have the volume for it, you're going to need 2 assistants to double book. So, what you might want to do, just to make this simple, is you might want to pick a point in the future where you really start double booking, or you might have 2 assistants now, in which case you can, but I would pick a point where I go live with this. I wouldn't try moving people around to make this work. And unless you're really booked out far in advance, in which case you're calling people weeks from now to move them around a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of having to move people around for no good reason, because it's really not a productive endeavor. If I'm just calling people to move them up for no other reason than I'm putting in a new system, I'm basically redoing work I already did. I already scheduled these patients. So I would try to pick a point a little bit in the future where I'm really going to bring this into full force, and that's assuming I have 2 assistants. You might have a situation where 6 weeks from now, you could see this as a viable option because you're booked out so far in advance, which is why you're inefficient, where you could start adjusting the schedule to double book, and you can start looking for a dental assistant now. You should be able to find an assistant in 6 weeks. And worst case scenario, you can bring in a temp, even a temp after if you need one. Make sure that you designate primary time on your schedule. When is primary time going to be? I recommend the mornings. I also talked about you might want to flip it. Some days you might do it in the afternoon. If you have a lot of patients that you feel that would disappoint if they couldn't come in the morning. Again, if you're like me and you just skipped last week's episode, if you hadn't heard it, you went right into this one. I mentioned in last week's episode that it should not be a problem to schedule people in the morning, and I give you a couple tips on how the doctor can help with that. Make sure that you build time into the schedule to sell. Very, very important. And, do that scheduling drill. Mess with it yourself. Have your office manager mess with it mess with it a little bit. Give it to your scheduler and see if they can play with it. And, the last thing I would do to see how this might impact your practice is I would take a look at, if you want to do something, it's sort of like maybe you've heard the term before, paper trading. This is where someone wants to learn investing, but they don't want to use actual money yet because they're a little too dangerous to do that, right? Well, you can paper trade with your schedule, meaning take last week's schedule the week before and look at what it would have looked like if you were properly double booking. You might find that you end up with 2 hours available in the morning. And let me tell you, it's the same amount of production with 2 open hours. You can fit other patients in there. So your production goes up. You also feel like you're working more efficiently. This way you can see, before you've really done anything, how this would impact your practice. And again, there is a lot to know about this. So if you really want to become immersed in the subject, I definitely recommend that you check out The Art of Scheduling Productively on DDS Success. The updated course should be dropping here in the near future. And you could also check out the Schedule Coordinator training course because that has all this data in there, so you can get a little bit more information. You could also come here to MGE and do our Scheduling for Production seminar. I have a link to that on the episode webpage. This is really a case where the more you know, the more policy you have in place, you sort of set up a framework within which to work, and it makes your office a lot more fun, efficient, productive, and it makes your life a lot more fun. You can enjoy an easier life. All right, folks. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope it helped. If you have any questions, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com, or you can visit us for more info at mgeonline.com. You can also call us at 800-640-1140. I have all the links to the stuff I talked about, the downloadables, the scheduling drill, as well as the DDS Success and our scheduling seminar if you want to check those out. Otherwise, folks, have a great week, and I will see you at the next episode.